I think it was June 2016, the transfer which was private to private, that means Orange to Jamhuri, you transferred, they extended a loan, which later you are paid, because the money you are paid is form of a loan. That's the reason why in your presentation you never paid any tax, you never paid any transaction. You are a lucky man in this world. You are just paid Kenyan money free of charge. You don't pay even tax, in the sense that you never gain then sell. Now, the money, the loan transferred from Orange to you, it was an extended loan. What do you mean by that word? Can you be able to explain to us to understand this loan which was transferred from Orange, then to you, later it was paid back to you with the Republic of Kenya, which you will prepare later? The last question, in your response, I may also want to know, because from the previous presentations we have been executing as an inquiry committee, nobody ever confessed that he knows you, either physically. Even last Parliament, I remember the former CS for ICT, he denounced that he doesn't know you. Now, when you are trying to answer the questions of knowledge in this government of Kenya, try to be categorical. How long have you known and how long have you transacted in the Republic of Kenya? In that connection, in your presentation, you are operating as a registration certificate number of Mauritius. In any case, did you register with the Republic of Kenya under the normal way we register ICT and data? Thank you, Chair.
Honorable members, in the interest of us being able to handle this well, I would want to admit the Vice Chair's proposal that we handle them in bits. So I will allow one question from the Honorable Mboni, who was the first one, and that will form the first bit of the first section of questions that will be responded to, and then we shall come back and go back in the order that I had said. So, Honorable Mboni, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for coming. In fact, our previous witnesses, they were portraying as if you are a mysterious person. So we are actually very happy to see one Paul Cunningham. Now, I have a few questions. We are seeing the transactions and agreement signed by you and yourself and government officers, and yet the government officers have really denied that they have never met you in person. They have also not met you through either Zoom or whatever. So how did you actually sign the agreements without even seeing the people? And who are the negotiators of these agreements? Were you using a transaction of an advisor? And if you are using transaction officers, were they Kenyans? And who are they? I think we need to know that. Two, who are the 5 biggest investors in Ilios? I think that's very important for us as we make decisions. And how much did you...
Just hold on, just for clarification.
Yes.
Honorable Mboni, are you talking about Helios, or are you talking about Jamhuri?
You see, Chair, Ilios is a fund. And Jamhuri Holding is a special purpose vehicle for investment, only owned by Ilios. So there must be people who have put money in Ilios.
That's what I want to be specific. Yes. Are you asking the biggest investor on this Telkom issue?
No.
Or generally?
Generally.
For Helios? In all the investments globally?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. So I think that's okay. How much did you pay to acquire your stake in Kenya Telkom Limited? And what made you give your shares for free? I mean, you are investors. You are supposed to make money. You are not a charitable organization or donor agency. What made you give money, your shares for free? And what was the reaction of the investors who have invested in Helios. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Paul Cunningham, kindly respond to these questions. We would recommend that with these ones, you do not respond in a verbose manner, just straight to the point, quick fire, just respond to the questions that have been raised. And if member has raised a question, they can only get an opportunity for a rejoinder after all the other members have asked their questions. Kindly respond, Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps on the first question, maybe there was a little bit of sort of misunderstanding. I didn't say there were no negotiations with the government of Kenya. What I said was that I did not participate in those negotiations. So there will have been other members of the Helios investment team who actually participated and negotiated with the government of Kenya.
That's important. I think co-chair would need a clarification on that.
Yes. Now that you know the one negotiation, then who was negotiating on behalf of Jamhuri Holdings or Helios Limited with the government of Kenya?
Off the top of my head, I'm afraid I don't know exactly which individuals. It will have been part of the team, so probably. So it will have been members of the, the partnership, Helios Investment Partners, and if I throw out a couple of names, there will have been our directors on Telkom Kenya. So we appointed some individuals as directors on Telkom. So, for example, Mr. Nitin Kaul, Mr. Dennis Aluanga, and then Babatunde Suyoye, who is one of the Helios founding partners, was also the main lead on our investment in TK, as he is the firm's sort of telecom expert. So it wasn't me. As I wasn't at the negotiations, I don't know exactly which one or which members of the team would have been directly involved.
Just for the record, could you just move slightly closer to the mic and state again the three names of those that you believe were involved in negotiations and their nationalities?
Right. So the negotiations will have been led by the transaction advisors. I think this answers another of the questions. Yes, we did have transaction advisors who will have helped with the negotiations. Our directors on the board of Telkom...
Sorry to cut you short, Mr. Cunningham. I asked that you repeat the directors that were involved in the negotiation and their nationalities. And then you can now go to the next question of who the transaction advisors were and how much they were paid. Please.
Yeah, sorry. I was trying to clarify, the fact that I'm not aware which of the directors were actively involved in the negotiations. I know there were two Helios appointed directors on the board of Telkom who may have been involved, but because I wasn't party to that, I can't state for absolute certain. And I'm speaking here under oath, so I'm not willing to speculate. I want to be clear that I'm going to tell you everything I know, but I'm not going to speculate without making it clear that it is speculation on my part.
You could actually say, I speculate that it was so and so. Okay.
Or I thought that's what I was trying to make clear. So it will have been potentially Nitin Kaul, who is a UK citizen, Dennis Aluanga, who is Kenyan, and Babatunde Suyoye, who, although not a director of Telkom, is one of the managing partners of Helios Investment Partners, and he also has British citizenship.
Equally, just to complete your response, the third director appointed is what nationality? What nationality is he or she?
No, he's not a director. He's British citizen, so he's British nationality, but he wasn't a director of Telkom.
But your submission is that, with your understanding of how Helios got into Kenya, that you speculate that chances are, now that you are not the one negotiating on behalf of Helios or Jamhuri, you highly speculate that these three could be the ones negotiating with Kenya government on these transactions.
Yes, together with our transaction advisors.
I'll take a point of order.
Chair, point of order.
Yes.
I remember we started by him introducing himself by giving us a passport. Now, in the sense that I'm sensing a lot of danger in his presentation, how can we prove that he's a director of Jamhuri Holdings? Does he have a proof of directorship?
Honorable Vice Chair, we'll come to that question because you had asked it. And members, I would ask for us to restrict the adjoining questions. There are members who haven't had their first round, so kindly allow us to have for the rule that we give ourselves to apply.
A small question.
That an adjoining question comes soon after, Honorable Mboni. Is that a point of order? Okay, kindly tell me what is out of order.
No, Chair, just a clarification. The three names that he has mentioned, are they directors of Telkom or the people who are negotiating on behalf of Telkom?
To my understanding, and I'll step in here, the two of them are directors, one isn't. But he suspects that they were involved in the transactions. So, honorable members, let's get the responses to these first round of questions, and then we can do the adjoining responses. Kindly attend to the questions that have been asked to fully certify the people who asked the questions so that we minimize on the rejoinder questions. So just take up those, and I'd given the allowance for us to have fewer questions so that we are thorough and complete on that, so that when we move to the next, we won't have interruptions coming from this first set of questions.
Okay, so we go look at the second question. So our transaction advisors were our legal counsel, and maybe at this point I'll answer one of the other questions in terms of how long they have been our legal counsel. I mean, I have been with Helios since 2008, and that was the first time in 2008 that I interacted with Anjawala and Kana. They worked for us on the Equity Bank transaction and have worked with us on pretty much every transaction that we've done in Kenya. Yeah, as a firm of sort of international laws.
I suspect you've already gone to the other questions, the very initial questions.
The transaction advisor, you've mentioned who your legal advisors were. Who were the transaction advisors? How much were they paid for this transaction?
The other advisors were Standard Bank, Stanbic, and John Ngumi. John Ngumi.
And John Ngumi.
Yeah.
Okay. John Ngumi happens to be a Kenyan lawyer.
Yep.
Give us just a short profile of who John Ngumi is.
I only know of John as a well-respected Kenyan businessman, former banker, who has worked with us on a number of transactions and potential transactions in the past. We brought him in to help on this particular transaction because we anticipated there being some issues with around FX, converting shillings into US dollars, and it is something that he had some familiarity with. So our relationship with him, though, predates the investment in Telkom Kenya, and I think as a well-respected former banker, he was an obvious choice for us to bring in to help with the transaction.
How much was he paid for the transaction and advisory?
I don't know the exact split. I know that across all of the advisors, we probably paid somewhere in the region of $4.5 to $5 million, but that includes legal, banking, and transactions.
We mean that you pay $4.5 what dollars? $4.5
million.
So $4.5 million
US dollars, yes.
And this is for both the legal fees and the transaction fees.
Yes.
Did you
and other expenses?
Okay, but could you kindly maybe confirm? You may not have it offered now. Could you confirm how much exactly that money was paid in terms of how much was legal fees and how much was transaction fees? You don't have to provide now, but I'd like to have that provision. Last follow-up question on that. Did you act with Mr. Ngumi as an individual or as a director of Ego Africa Capital Partners? Were you acting with Mr. Ngumi as an individual or as the investment consortium? And what capacity were you? Was he a transaction advisor as an individual or as a director in I think it's Ego Africa Capital Partners?
I'm not off the top of my head. I'm not sure exactly who we transacted with. I believed it was him as an individual, but that's just that's my belief at the moment. Would need to check. Yes, but we have dealt with him personally for in excess of 5 years. How it was structured is the bit I don't know. Yes, sorry, just to clarify, we have dealt with John as a transaction advisor on multiple transactions, not just with respect to Telkom Kenya. Employees? Right, so I think the next question was around payments to employees, and again, this is something very typical in any private equity transaction, is the need to incentivize the management team to make sure there is an alignment of interest between the management of the business and the shareholders, so that we are all pulling in the same direction. So, the payments, I think, under the terms of the MIP went to both current and former employees, because they would have received their entitlement when they were employees, but retained that even when they were no longer employed by Telkom. And I think this was instigated when we invested in 2016.
Was any of this payment for management from the 6 billion shillings that was paid in August?
Yes, it was paid out of the proceeds of the transaction.
So how much of those proceeds of the transaction was paid back to the management of Telkom?
Um, I would need to check.
So could you kindly confirm with us, maybe the next, how long do you need to get that information of how much of the 6 billion shillings that was paid went back to the management of Telkom?
Right.
And maybe even so that it's more detailed, I would imagine an investment fund the size of Helios would have some really good bookkeeping, would be of interest for Kenyans to know. When you say it is a payment back to management and employees, which of the Telkom employees and management qualified for this incentive and how much to each? But you can tell us who qualified. That I know you would know the amounts. You can tell us later. Which of the management and employees at Telkom qualified for an incentive?
I can't name names because I don't have that information in front of me. It will have been the senior management team at Telkom. In terms of the MIP, that was all managed by a third party because it was structured in the form of a trust. So I don't have the names off the top of my head of the participants.
Who is this, the third party that made the process, this payment back to management?
Adili trustees.
The trustees. Do you know who the trustees, who these trustees are?
Adili?
Sorry?
Adili.
Adil trustees.
Adili.
Is a farm based in Kenya or Mauritius or London? Or?
Kenya. Based in Kenya.
So it's called Adil trustees. They're the ones that Okay. They're the ones that manage the incentive back payment to management.
Allow me, members, to just engage Wakili here so that their clients can actually give us the information that we need. Kindly confirm to us, is this Adili an investment dealer or Adili a lawyer? Or is it a shareholder, or who is Adili?
And again, perhaps, is this the same Adili, one of the shareholders of Telkom Limited?
With the permission of the chairman, and I say this solely for purposes of clarification, it is known as Adili Trustees. It is a Kenyan entity. Adili, A-D-I-L-A. Adili. It has nothing to do, I can hear Honorable Shakir saying a deal. It is not a deal. Has nothing to do with any particular. So it's Adili trustees. And to also clarify, they were holding shares through the scheme which he referred to, which is the management incentive scheme for senior employees, and were holding shares solely for the beneficiaries at the time when Telkom Kenya, or when Helios made the investment into Telkom Kenya. So back to the witness. Thank you.
Next question: why did Helios sell to the government of Kenya through the put, not to a third party? We had the legal right to exercise the put option. I think, given the history of the transaction, in particular the refusal of the government to approve the merger with Airtel, we felt it would be difficult to get interest from any sort of third-party investor. So I'm afraid we took the path of least resistance and exercised our legal right to sell it back to the government of Kenya. We had tried to, I think our first approach here was the merger with Airtel, which would have allowed us then to exit our stake through selling shares in a listed merged business, because ultimately we were coming to the point in the fund where we needed to be thinking about how we realise the investment and move on. Right. Was there any political influence? That's the next question.
We're still concerned on that question because we don't want to come back and ask rejoinder questions on these matters. We would like to know, the moment the decision was taken that shareholders will walk out without getting any dividends, it means that everyone else loses out. The only payment made is the incentive to the senior management. All the other shareholders never claimed any dividend out of this transaction or anything worth their shares.
If I understand the question correctly, yes, that's correct. No other shareholder received anything for their shares as a result of the transaction, because I think the transfer of the shares took place not at the Telkom level, but between the two existing shareholders.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so there were no payments went to Helios Investment Partners. There were no payments went to the directors of Jamhuri. The only proceeds went to pay advisors, to pay contractual obligations towards employees, and then return funds to our investors. I don't know if this is a good point to address the question on the shareholders of Jamhuri, just to clarify that.
It's important, and why we had allowed Wakili to answer this question on who Adili is so that we are able to draw a network of the people who you are involved with in Kenya. Co-chair?
And perhaps this I'll ask the lawyer now that you respond about Adili. What is the relationship between Adili and Anjarwala and Hana law firm? Is there any direct... This is not the witness. I think this goes to the lawyer now that you offered to respond on behalf of Adili.
Honorable Chair, our understanding for today's purpose was that we were here to address the issues that were being addressed to our client, being Mr. Cunningham. To the extent that there is a requirement for any other party to appear before the committee, they are willing to do so. But at this point in time, I think it is important that we keep the issues to the questions that are being sought from Mr. Paul Cunningham, for which the purpose of this meeting was constituted.
Legal counsel, we will follow the procedure. In fact, the only reason why I asked this question directly to yourself is because although the witness appearing before us today was Mr. Paul Cunningham, and you were there to guide, but when the question of Adili came up, you offered yourself to answer that question. So, which begs the question, is there a relationship between Adili and Anjarwala and Hana advocates? And if you do not want to respond in this particular one, we will follow the due process, we will invite you, and you will come and respond that particular time. I just thought that you could benefit from you being here. It will save us time, it will save us resources, and again, I only asked before you offered. The first time you responded to anything was when Adili was mentioned and you offered to respond and tell us who Adili is. So is there a relationship between Adili and Anjarwala and Hana advocates? You may or may not respond. It's up to you.
We will not respond at this point because the question that was asked, we were asked about the pronunciation and we explained it. So it was in the context of the question that the chair asked and not in the general context. So we would be very happy to give further clarifications in due course. Today, we are here as representatives of Mr. Paul Cunningham, and we shall keep to those questions that pertain to the client. Thank you.
Fair enough.
Granted, and kindly be conscious of our time, Wakili. Let's go on with the questions that had been asked so that we take the second round of questions.
Right. So, next question, was there any political influence? Simple answer, no, none whatsoever. Next question, have I been to Kenya personally? Once, and just coming up for 32 years ago. That's the only time I personally have been in Kenya. No, and yeah, maybe a point of clarification for most of our investments, this sort of structure is not unusual, where we have the deal professionals who manage the day-to-day, and then I will sit on the board of the SPV that holds that investment. So it's not unusual for, and we have investments across more than 30 countries. It's not unusual for me not to meet, not to know the management team. It's not unusual for me not to visit the portfolio company personally. I'm probably a director of more than a dozen of these SPVs, and as I said at the start, my role is one of governance. I'm an accountant by training, and so I'm not an investment professional. We have a team of 40 investment professionals within Helios Investment Partners who are far better suited to looking at the investment decisions and the management of an investment, far better suited than I am. I am one step removed looking at the governance around the decision-making process. I think we've dealt with the frustrations, and I think that's clear in our letters to the government and in the government's responses back to us that the investment in Telkom did not go the way we expected and the way we hoped for, and I think we realised when the Airtel deal was refused that this was probably not going to be a particularly good investment for Helios, and that there would be little benefit us remaining as an investor, either for Telkom or for our investors.
Kindly expound on that, because the import of that question was to inform this committee on the urgency. And Paul, you have to understand that the transactions were happening just a few days before election. The payments were drawn out of a contingency fund. In fact, actually invoking Article 223. So there was a mega urgency. So we wanted to know, the committee is keen to find out whether there is any connection with how hurriedly this the transaction was done, and whether it has any relation with the election calendar, because then we would be able to know if there is any connection between the election calendar and the payments that were done.
I guess from our perspective, this transaction was not completed in a rush. We started the process over a year earlier, and I think we didn't feel that taking 12 months to conclude what should have been a relatively straightforward exercise of a put option was undue haste. So no, we didn't believe that it was dealt with very quickly. I think, to my mind, the fact that it concluded around the election time was probably a coincidence, because we had started the process well in advance of any election. As I said, we started the process in the middle of July 2021 and had anticipated that it would take a far shorter time to conclude and to settle the option and for us to walk away from our investment in Telkom.
Perhaps, what do you think is the worst that could have happened had the payment been made, say, 6 months later? Like if this payment was not made on the August of 2022, and the government of Kenya told you that we would like to make this payment, and you will make this payment, say, in January of 2023, what do you think would have been the impact of that decision from your side as Jamhuri holders?
We would have been disappointed that it had taken 18 months, but I don't think there would have been much that we could have done about it. We were there ready to receive the funds when the government was in a position to pay us.
Thank you.
So the next question was the flow, or the next two questions, I guess, were around the flow of funds. So all of the money paid from the Treasury went into the bank account of Jamhuri Holdings, and from that account, the various transaction-related costs that we've already discussed were paid, and then the residual, barring a relatively small amount held back for further costs, the residual was distributed up to the Helios Fund and then out to the investors in the Helios Fund. And were anyone to to perform an audit on that flow of funds, and our auditors have certainly audited the flow out of the fund to LPs, and that's KPMG. Were anyone to perform an audit of that flow of funds, they would find that the cash has moved in exactly the way I've described it over the course of this session. Okay, I think the next question that hasn't been addressed is around my role as CFO of not of the Helios, but of the Helios Investment Partners, and as a director of Jamhuri. I think the two roles are linked. It's not one came first. Well, I suppose I wouldn't have been a director of Jamhuri Holdings were I not the CFO of Helios Investment Partners. And again, it's quite common practice within private equity that you will have the CFO or another senior member of the non-deal doing team who sits as a director on the board of the SPV, because it gives additional control around the governance of that investment. So I'm on the board was on the board of Jamhuri because I was the CFO of Helios Investment Partners, not because I had any particular specific knowledge of investing into telco, but I'm also on the board of probably another 5 similar investments in other jurisdictions out of the same fund. I'm not the sole director. We have, there is a Mauritian local corporate director there to ensure that we comply with Mauritian laws. Can I prove that I'm a director of Jamhuri? Not immediately, but yes, of course, I can. We can provide copies of the register of directors of Jamhuri Holdings that will show that I am a director and have been since it was first incorporated back in 2016. The next question was, do I know certain people? I have not met any of them. Again, back to my sort of previous comments, it's not unusual for me not to meet members of the team. Of them, am I aware of any? Eddie and Njoroge? Yes. Familiar with him, and I think we have corresponded on various matters. The other two.
Ever met him in person,
No.
either in Kenya or elsewhere?
No. As I say, I've never met him in person.
What have been the nature of your correspondences? Are they all in writing? Have there been Zoom meetings? Have there been phone calls? What is your nature of relationship?
All have been in writing, via email. I have no reason to talk over Zoom or Teams or even by phone with any of the management team.
Kindly, it might come to a point where we will require to know which point of order is offended. But let me get some responses so that we don't get. There's a microphone that must be on. Kindly, Daktari.
Chair, Elios appointed somebody or nominated somebody by the name Eddie Njoroge into directorship. How was he identified by Elios? If he doesn't know.
Wonderful, and I want to, if such is the nature of the question, that's a clarification, and it shall be sought. Honorable,
in line with that one, so that
Honorable Ruto, kindly. The reason why I didn't want to open it up is because this is a clarification. It's a substantive question.
Very important.
It's not a point of order. Is there something out of order?
I wanted to follow it after knowing that
No,
one.
I don't want you to do
here.
a clarification. Kindly,
Yeah, just a clarification.
because you'll get a point where
all
you
right.
shall ask questions.
It's all right.
Yes.
Listen, Chair. Because Eddie Njoroge has said he doesn't represent anybody else's interest. So it's good while Paul is responding, while Eddie was being appointed, whose interest was he appointed to represent?
Allow members, because these are clarifications, these are substantive questions that this committee will want prosecuted fully. I'd want to see if there is a point of order of something that is substantially out of order, away from our standing orders. If not, he completes this set of questions, we go to the next, kindly. Is anything out of order? Oh, well, okay, we are in order. Thank you.
My question was very clear. As he's giving us a definition of who's Eddie, who was Eddie to Jamhuri Holdings? Who was he to Jamhuri Holdings?
The question was whether you know Eddie Njoroge. We have asked how you interact with him. A follow-up question is, as you have heard from Daktari and from the Vice Chair, kindly respond so that we move on to the next set of questions.
There is no relationship between Jamhuri and Eddie Njoroge. He is a director of Telkom. He has no link to Jamhuri.
Was Mr. Eddie Njoroge an appointee of Helios? Was he an appointee of Jamhuri? Was he a nominee before he was appointed to become the chair? Who nominated him to the board?
That I don't know the answer to. We'll have to get back to you on that.
Can I put it to you, Mr. Paul Cunningham, from the knowledge of this committee, that Edin Njoroge was nominated by Helios and Jamhuri to sit on the board of Telkom Kenya, and then appointed as a chairperson. Would it be odd that you do not know that you appointed, you nominated him to the board? Should this committee find it odd that you have no idea that you nominated Eddie to the board?
It is possible that he was our nominee, but no, it isn't odd that I personally do not know whether he was appointed as a Jamhuri nominee or was appointed as an independent director. It would be odd if no one within Helios Investment Partners knew the answer to that, but it is not odd, given my role, that I don't know the answer to that question.
Chairman.
Granted, kindly continue to the next question.
So the other two names, again, I have not met any of those. I believe that Akur Yatani was a government, he was the cabinet secretary. He signed certain letters, so there has been correspondence between him as the representative of the government and myself as the representative of Jamhuri, but no sort of personal interaction. I have never communicated directly with him other than via the sort of the formal letters that you've seen in the pack. The third name, I'm afraid I don't know who that is. Joel Mucheru? I have no idea who that is.
Chair.
So I think moving on to the next set of questions. As I said, the negotiations will have taken place between the government and representatives of Jamhuri, be it other members of the Helios investment team acting in the best interest of the Helios Fund, either directly or through our investment advisors. And then once the legal documentation was finalised, that would go through our investment committee process and then come to me, knowing that it had been approved by the investment committee. I would then physically sign the transaction documents. 5 largest investors in Helios, unfortunately I'm not able to say. We're covered by confidentiality clauses. I think I've mentioned a number of investors where it is public record that they have made an investment, but in terms of the size, the ranking, I can't say that in open forum. And again, how much did Jamhuri pay to acquire its stake in Telkom? This was a private private transaction between ourselves and France Telecom. So again, I can't disclose that information. It didn't involve the government. They played no part in the negotiations between Helios and France Telecom. Right. Then the final question, the question on why did we give government the shares for free, is that the 10% we gifted at the start? Yeah. Right. I think when we took over the investment from France Telecom, we were very keen to make sure that our interests and the government's were aligned, and that the government would not feel that by helping the competition, free up the market for competition, they weren't just merely enriching a third-party investor, but so by gifting the shares and gifting a portion of the loan notes, it meant we felt we should have had a clear alignment with our co-shareholder. And when we go into this sort of partnership, we want to be sure that both parties are working together with a common goal. And again, it was something that will have been negotiated by the members of Helios Investment Partners. But I think there was a subsequent question around how our investors in the fund would have felt about us giving these away for no consideration. Well, I think they entrust the decision-making process to Helios Investment Partners, and we felt that by realigning the interests of the two shareholders, that would ultimately be in the best interest of the investors in our fund, because it would potentially lead to a better outcome. And we were partially recovering the position from where the government had been diluted by France Telecom, as they had made additional investments into Telkom that the government, for whatever reason, hadn't matched, and therefore had gone from a 49% stake to a 30% stake. So we were putting the government back closer to where they were.
Honourable members, kindly indulge me. If we preserve time, I'll allow for a final session where if any member has a clarification, that member will get a go at a direct question to the witness through the chair. So you can have a quick fire exchange at the tail end of the questions that we have given. So kindly members, let's have the Honourable Shakil, the Honourable Kivasu, Honourable Munyoro, and Honourable Tanui in that order.
Before that, Chair, something...
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair. You might want to switch that off. My name is Shakil Shabir Ahmed. I have the honor of being a chartered accountant like you and studied in Britain. I also have the honor of leading GOPAC and APNAC, which is a global body on parliamentarians against corruption, and we have oversight of certain transactions that affect our country, Kenya, and Africa at large. I say this just for your own knowledge, so that we have actually got more information about things like this that you may not feel that we have access to. In your business, which is Helios Investment Partners, you are the CFO, as you very correctly said. The registered address is your own home in Prosperous Farm. Maybe that's just coincidence. Your main partners is somebody called Baba Dogo or Baba Soyoyo, Topa Lawani, Dennis Luanga, who I know personally, is a Kenyan. He was with the IPS group and ACFED when I was working with them. There is a guy called Nitin Kaul, he's a Kenyan of Asian origin. There's 2 or 3 others, Beni Funyo. So I put it to you that you have stated that your organization has moral and ethical values, and yet there are not, and you have very transparent transactions. we wonder, could you please give to us the agreement that you signed initially, which has that put agreement in it? You know, we haven't seen that agreement yet. It hasn't come in from Telkom. We'd like to see your version of that agreement. We'd also like you to tell us which account number and where the $51 million actually went. You remember that there's this question about illicit funding. We're not saying for 1 minute that this is the case. We just feel that there should be there should be a sort of a source document showing us where the money went, either to Mauritius or did it go to the United Kingdom. Of course, then with your pay, you're going to let us know, of course, your commissions and paybacks and your management charges. Could you kindly tell us, while you were here at Telkom, who was being paid the management charges? A daily trust, for your reference, Chair, has a 0.14% investment. I think it's a shareholder, by the way. And Karim Bhai Anjawala is one of the main partners. There is another gentleman who's a whistleblower, and I don't want to give you his name, but he's given us a lot of good information. We have no doubt whatsoever as to your capacity and as to the direction you've taken. What we want from you, sir, is transparency in this particular
Honorable
transaction.
Shakil,
thank you very much. Those are my comments.
just hold on, Honorable Shakil, before you cede the floor. From the submissions, if it would aid your questioning so that you don't request for anything that is already submitted here, in the submissions that came from Jamhuri Holdings, there is an indication of where the money was paid to. And on RTGS, would that aid your question?
You see, Mr. Chair, I'm sure you know, any dollar, any transaction in the United States dollar, any transaction anywhere in the world is subject to scrutiny by the United States government and under the illicit transfer fund, etc. That's a norm that the United States government has been doing. So I'm just saying, if we have the RTGS and you're able to and you're very clear that you're able to, there's a money trail, that'll be good enough for us. What my concern is, who's this Baba Dogo? Baba Tunde Soyoyo, he is the chairman. You seem to have a lot of African partners, including my friend Dennis Olwanga. And that is the same person you appointed as the director of Telkom. He's one of your partners. He's also a qualified accountant in the United Kingdom. And so is Nitin Kaul. So we're wondering, it might be very clear, it's just by coincidence, but there are a lot of Kenyan influence in Helios investment. And why is Helios investment not registered at St. Charles, 12th floor St. Charles building? Why is Helios going invested in Prosperous Farm, which is your personal property, which shows that you are the main partner of Helios? Thank you so much. I've got nothing else to say.
Question well noted. The Honorable Kivasu.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Kivasu Nzioka, Member of Parliament, Booni, and Member of the Communication, Information and Innovation Committee. My first question, on question 2, page 4, part B. You say in June 2016, Jamhuri acquired the Orange its 70 shareholding, and you go on to say the shareholder loans that had been extended from Orange to TKL amounting to 332,832,907 is kind of the shareholding that JHL had gotten. Then you go ahead and say the transaction was between two private parties. Please, can you name those two private parties? 2, on the same private parties, all the communications that we have, Paul Gerard Cunningham is the director who has been signing all those documents. Were you the only director in Jamhuri Holdings? 2, on the same, you said your transaction did not involve sale of any assets, rights or obligations of or payments by the government of Kenya. What transactions did you carry out in the absence of all this? And who exactly was involved in those two transactions? My second question. You said you joined Ilios in 2008. And in 2016, you are part and parcel of the Jamhuri at entry into this cell. At that point in time, all the communications have no any other person apart from Paul Cunningham up to today. Were you operating alone? On the same breath, the co-chair put a question on whether you have ever come to Kenya and met any of these people you have been negotiating with. I'll put it differently. While sitting in UK, while communicating with all the persons within the country, did any one of them visit you in UK? And when you are doing all these transactions, how did you carry out the transactions? Were they all on paper? Or at one point, you talked to somebody to agree on some of these agreements? It's a shock to me when you say you don't know Hedi Joroge. In your letter and at exit, you wrote and said Eddie Joroge should resign as a director and should resign as a chairman. You wrote that, and you are saying you don't know Joroge. How do you tell somebody to resign with a letter that is not dated and you don't know the person? Let me tell you without mincing my words. In this payment of 6.1 billion, you are the interest, and you need to be transparent. You need to tell us the truth. Because it was paid, and paid to one Jamhuri Holdings, with only one non-director. And you don't seem to know exactly how the payments were done after it reached Jamhuri. Please come aboard. Tell us exactly how that money went, and who exactly received, those from within the country and those from without the country, so that we can make our informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Mucheru, Member of Parliament Kigumo, and a member of this committee, Finance and National Planning. I think I'll follow up on what Honorable Kibas was asking.
Honorable Shakil, kindly switch off your microphone.
I know when you're investing as an investor, when you have shareholder loans, those are, you treat that as an asset. And when you came in and bought out Orange, you came in, gave the government of Kenya 10% of the shareholding, which you acquired, and on top of that, gave them the part of the loan, which was about 133 million US dollars, which is about 40%. At the tail end of this transaction, when you are exiting, you still give them the remainder of the loan, which is 239 million US dollars, and which you gave away for free. One, you say that you are not involved in this transaction, which is strange because for such amounts of money, the CFO of a firm must surely have an input. Number two, you went ahead and demanded or requested to be paid for the 51 million US dollars, which is a pittance compared to what you are giving away. And I would like to know what was the rationale for that, why you'd like to give away over 300 million but claim 51 million US dollars. Number two, these 51 million US dollars came about as a result of a loan which was 47 million US dollars. I would like to know whether this was in cash or it was in management fees, or whether it was a capital injection in form of real cash. And finally, the issue that one of the reasons that you gave for exiting Telkom was you were having issues, and there was an arbitrary expropriation of an asset by the government, if I got that clearly. I would like to know what that asset was and the value of that asset. Thank you.
Finally, we shall have for this session Honorable Tanui.
Thank you, Chair. Most of my questions have been dealt with, so I only have one to ask. Through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Paul talked of having invested in Equity Bank. So I just wanted to know the percentage in shares they have in that bank. Thank you.
Thank you. As Paul is preparing to respond to this set of questions, I would like to just do some little housekeeping because I've realized that we have an open door. I'd like to know, members of the press, we are really happy to have you. Let me find out how many of us are members of the Fourth Estate. Just by a show of hand, I won't ask for an introduction. If you're representing a media house, just by a show of hand, so that we know who is in the house. So away from the members of the press and away from our Bunge staff, who else do we have in the room? So that we get to know who, kindly, we'd like to know who is in the room so that and tell us what interests you here, kindly.
My name is Elizabeth Mwangi. I'm the parliamentary officer at the British High Commission. I'm here to just observe.
Okay. Anybody else who is not a member of... Yes, kindly.
Hello, my name is Tracy Gikandi. I'm an intern at Anjawala and Kana, and I'm just here to observe.
Isabella Koge is my name. I'm the Parliamentary Liaison Officer, National Treasury.
Understood. Thank you. At least we, clerks, you now have an idea of who is in the room. Kindly, Paul, this is a second set of questions. Kindly tackle that.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, before we start, can I just ask the last questioner to repeat the question? I'm afraid we didn't catch it all.
Honorable Mwalimu Joseph Tanui.
Thank you, Chair. My question was just on the one. During his submission, Ball talked of having invested in the Equity Bank. So I just wanted to know the percentage of in shares they have in that bank, Equity Bank.
Kindly clarify, you talked about interests in Kenya, and the honorable member representing Kuresoi South is keen to know specifically on the investment at Equity, and maybe further on, is it an investment by Helios, or does Jamhuri also have an interest in that investment? To the tune of how much have you invested in Equity?
Honorable Chairman, just before we begin, on one point of order which we thought that we should bring to your attention, in the submissions that have been given by your members, in one instance, private information pertaining to our client's house may have been mentioned. And we would just caution that certain information from a data privacy perspective may not necessarily need to be set out in camera. So if there is any need to mention any such issue, we would request your indulgence in taking a lot of precaution. We understand that we live in a world where information pertaining to people's homes, houses, can be misused. So we request that you take that on advisement.
Well, the honourable member will first tell us the source of the information, but more importantly, and co-chair, you can have a go at this, on inviting your client. We had said that this will not be an inquiry in camera, and it will remain so. The questions shall be fielded in an open plenary session. We have not found any need yet to have any part of this inquiry be held in camera. And before you respond, co-chair, I'd like because it was a direct mention on addresses given, so you can tell us where the source is and why you would have wanted to allude to it.
Chairman, this is a public knowledge. Companies House has registered office of Helios Investment as that building Prosperous Farm. You can go to the Companies House registry and you can check it out. Unless he has been changed lately and Companies House has not updated the records, I put it on record to you, and you are a chartered accountant, and I'm sure you can check that it is registered as at Companies House as a registered address, and that is public knowledge.
It is the point I was coming to, Wakili, that in sourcing the address of the company, the honourable member alluded to the fact that the company is registered in Paul Cunningham's private address. So maybe the only reaction here would be either to in form of a rebuttal, to say that that is not the address of the company. However, as it appears registered, according to the honourable member, it appeared to be registered in the private address of Mr. Paul Cunningham as a company.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe if I address that point. No. The Companies House registered address for Helios Investment Partners LLP is not and never has been my personal address. For the last 10 years at least, it has been second floor, 12 Charles II Street, St James's, London, SW1Y4QU. And prior to that, it was at the company's previous address, which was New Bond Street, again, London. My personal address can only have been picked up from Companies House where it is associated with myself as a member of the partnership. So Helios Investment Partners LLP is a limited liability partnership which has a number of members, of which Dennis Aluanga is not one. It is only UK residents who are members of the partnership. It is registered with Companies House at the Charles II Street address. It is registered with the Financial Conduct Authority at the same address. My address never forms any part of the company's registered offices. I am not a senior member of the firm. Yes, I am a partner, I am a member of the partnership, but the founding partners, the founding members, are the two gentlemen who actually founded Helios back in 2004-2005, Babatunde Shoyoye and Temitokwe Luwani. I'm surprised that...
Allow me, Paul, because I'd like Honorable Shakil, what would be fair here is to tell us where the source of the information is and if what has been offered by the witness is the right position, because if this address is not attached to Helios or Jamhuri, then you will be required to withdraw it out of records if it only appears at company's house on account of being noted as the personal address of the director of the company, then it doesn't form part of what we would want to go on record.
Chair, parliamentary protocol demands that I either justify within 24 hours or withdraw. I have asked for a copy of the search document that was prepared for me from the United Kingdom, and if for that reason, as you will say, that there may have been a mistake in the search document, whoever filled it up, we shall be able to, I will then withdraw and apologize. But let me please, Mr. Chair, be allowed to get that search document. Nowadays we can get it very quickly. And the gentleman who did the search for me, to give me that search document. Thank you very much. And if I'm wrong, then I will withdraw and apologize.
Wakili, it's to assure you that if we so find that this is an address only attributed to Paul Cunningham is in his personal capacity, it shall not form part of the records of these proceedings. Thank you very much, Paul. Kindly respond to the questions that have been put to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Right, so I think in the next question, the agreement with the government that contains the put option, we can certainly provide that. I think having a management incentive plan as a shareholder of the company that plan relates to, again, is standard practice. So again, just to clarify on Adili Trust, it was holding the shares as trustee for the management team, not in its own capacity. So again, it is sort of standard practice for any sort of private equity, well actually most, not even just private equity-backed businesses, for management incentive shares to be held on trust until an event happens that those shares vest in the individual members of the management team. Yep. So moving on to the next question, when Jamhuri acquired the shareholder loan and the equity, the two private parties involved in the transaction were Jamhuri acting on behalf of its shareholder, the Helios Fund, and France Telecom. There's no involvement of government. Right. Yeah, so next question, we've obviously answered whether I've been to Kenya before. The follow-up question was, did any of those individuals visit me or in the UK, or did I meet with any of them there? The answer to that is no. Were there any unwritten agreements? Not that I was party to, so no. Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, there was no transfer of assets and liabilities. The only transaction, the only transfer was the ownership of the shares in Telkom Kenya and the loan notes issued by Telkom Kenya. On Eddie Njoroge, I don't think I said I didn't know him. I said I have never met him. I have had various communications with him. I have corresponded with him. I haven't met him. I don't believe I have spoken to him by phone. But again, given my role in Helios and my role in the transaction, it would be more unusual if I did have direct dealings with management team on some of our portfolio companies.
I think I just explained. Do you classify Mr. Eddie Njoroge as part of the management team, or do you see him as a board member of Telkom?
I don't really differentiate between the two. Board members of our portfolio companies we would see as part of the management of that portfolio company. He is not a Helios employee. He is not part of Helios. He is someone that was put in as a board member to help manage Telkom Kenya.
Because you earlier told us that you do not know how he got to the board. So all your correspondences, all your interactions with Mr. Eddie Njoroge have been after Helios had appointed him and he had gotten elected as chair. Is that your submission?
Yes, I don't. I stick with I do not know. I do not recall how he was appointed and in what capacity, whether it was a Helios nominee or whether, as happens quite regularly, he was an independent individual that we sourced to play the role as an independent director on the board of Telkom rather than a Helios nominee, i.e. whether he was acting at our behest or acting truly as an independent director. And that's the distinction that I'm afraid I don't recall.
Well, we will take that to be your submission, Mr. Paul Cunningham. But for the sake of these proceedings going forward, it would be important for us to state that, to the best of the knowledge of this committee, is that Mr. Eddie Njoroge was nominated actually by Helios to sit on the board of Telkom, and in fact, after serving, it was Helios that requested for him to step down as chair, and so he is a nominee of Helios. He's not an independent director. He comes in as a nominee of Helios and gets elected chair of the board, just for the sake of the conversation going forward. But your submission is well taken, that you have no idea how he got onto the board of Telkom.
Yes, and we can follow up with that, but 7 years ago, I don't recall exactly how things played out back then.
Chairman.
Is it to that question?
Chairman.
Yes.
Clarification.
Let me get Honorable Makilap and then come to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I do not know whether the Paul Cunningham that we started is still the same Paul Cunningham that we are dealing with now, because he is actually the director of Jamhuri Holdings. And Jamhuri Holdings is owned or it's owned by Helios, who appointed Eddie Njoroge and later on asked for him to resign. Honestly, Cunningham, are you still up to now the director of Jamhuri in these circumstances in relation to Eddie Njoroge? And who fronted? Because you are a European from England. Eddie Njoroge is a Kenyan. Who is this singular investor in Helios who gave out the name of Edin Njoroge?
Honorable Makilap, I'll mark that as a question that goes on record to be answered together with the other questions. Honorable Kivaso, I would imagine it's an intervention.
Yes, Chair. And I would like Paul Cunningham to state clearly, since 2016, as a director of Jamhuri Holdings and as a main person of Helios, 2016 to 2023, you have never met anybody from Telkom Kenya, and you have never met anybody from government, and you have been transacting heavy businesses. Can you categorically say, I have never met anybody from Telkom Kenya, and I've never met any senior government from the government of Kenya? Yes or no? Thank you.
Honorable Co-Chair, and then I will allow Paul kindly now. I'll protect you to answer the questions that have been asked without any intervention. So, Co-Chair.
And perhaps further to that, there was an agreement during the acquisition of Telkom that you will provide management services during that acquisition. And at the exit, one of the things that signaled the letter, I think that in July of 2022, you actually said notice that you were withdrawing the management services to Telkom. And so in that letter, it's actually written by yourself. So that's why it appears to be very curious that you are offering management services to Telkom Kenya, and yet there was no any communication there was no any engagement per se between yourself and the chairperson of the board of Telecom Limited, which you were offering management services to. So then what was the nature of these management services that you were offering then to Telkom Limited?
Mr. Paul Cunningham, whatever order you choose, this is the second set of questions. Kindly respond to them. And then we can take the third set of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think if we start this set, just revisiting the difference, I guess, between the Helios Fund, which is the financial investor in Jamhuri and therefore in Telkom Kenya, and Helios Investment Partners as the fund manager. So the fund itself is very much a passive vehicle. It entrusts the management of its investments, the decision making around which investments to make, how to manage those investments on a day-to-day basis, and then when to exit those investments. That responsibility is delegated to Helios Investment Partners as the investment manager, and of which I am very definitely not the senior partner or even a senior partner in the team. I am the CFO, but the firm was founded by Mr. Suyoye and Mr. Luani, and there are very many investment professionals within the firm who would know people in Kenya, appropriate people in Kenya, to appoint as a director onto Telkom Kenya. It isn't something that I personally would need to know. It's a little bit surprising that there should be any question over why an African-focused private equity firm should employ predominantly Africans to look at what investments to make across the continent. We are a firm that was founded by Africans, and the majority of our investment professionals are African because they have the insight into investing on the continent. I'm an English chartered accountant. I know nothing about investing into Kenya. I don't pretend to know anything about investing into Kenya, but within the Helios Investment Partners investment team, we have a number of people who know far more about investing into Kenya. And people like Mr. Suyoye, who was one of the instigators of our initial investment into Equity Bank way back in 2006, or Mr. Luani, who drove our investment in Vivo Energy in 2010, 2011. So the expertise lies within the much wider Helios team. And Helios consists of somewhere in the region of 50 individuals, of which there are maybe 8 or 9 currently who are partners of the firm. So it is definitely more than a one-man band. I play a very specific role in the firm and in the investments, which is around the structuring of the investments and the management of the entity that makes the investment, but not of the investment itself. There was while talking about Equity Bank, there was a question on what percentage. When we first made the investment in 2006 into Equity Bank, it was, I believe 24.9% of equity. We divested that in 2015, 2016, so currently have no interest in Equity Bank. So I believe we had sold our interest in Equity Bank actually prior to incorporating Jamhuri Holdings, which was set up solely and exclusively for the purposes of making the investment in Telkom Kenya. And the investment in Equity Bank would have been made through a similar special purpose vehicle incorporated purely for the purpose of making that investment into Equity Bank. So it is very much standard operating practice, and I think every investment that we have made in the sort of 30-odd investments across the life of the firm will have been structured in the same way, and it is quite common for the director of that holding company not to be involved in any of the day-to-day management and not to actually interact with the investment team or with other stakeholders in that deal, or with the management team rather. Now, I'm going to need help on answering one of the questions in terms of the land, because I'm not sure I can pronounce it.
With your kind permission, Chair, there was a question with regard to the property that was appropriated by the government. Based on the correspondence that we have, it was a property which is situated on Ngong Road. It measures approximately 79 acres, and the value of the property was approximated at Kenya shillings 10 billion.
Wakili, it is a parcel of land very well known to the chair, yours truly. The question here would be, the submissions by Paul are that this was one of the reasons why Helios would feel that this investment wasn't making sense to them. So the question would be, in the initial agreement, had it been indicated to Helios that by buying into Telkom, they also buy into their assets and everything else that Telkom owned?
Mr. Chair, it was our understanding that as shareholders of Telkom, we would have an interest through our shareholding in all of the assets of Telkom. It's a legal right of any shareholder to have an interest, indirect interest, in the assets of the entity that you're a shareholder of.
Mr. Paul Cunningham, this is of concern to the proceedings that we are having. How did the whole conversation around the assets of Telkom happen? How did Helios learn of government's separate interest in assets at Telkom? Was it at board level? Was it communicated to you as shareholders? Or how did you come to learn that government is either annexing some of these assets or wanting to utilize them separately away from the agreement that you had?
We learnt of it through our seat on the board of Telkom, because there was communication between Telkom. We weren't directly involved in the correspondence, but there was communication between Telkom as the owner of the land and the government of Kenya about the government's desire to take that land for different uses. And we were concerned as a director, as directors of Telkom, that these were assets that we felt belonged to Telkom Kenya and should be used for the benefit of Telkom Kenya. Our expectation would be, anywhere that we invest, if the government needs a particular asset or a piece of land, it will ultimately pay fair value for that asset, not just take it for no consideration, which is our understanding of what was happening here.
Well, I'll let the Chair of Finance just clarify what you have said. Co-Chair?
And you see, perhaps, did you pursue any legal action or any arbitration on why the government of Kenya was taking over such a strategic asset from you without the consent of you as a shareholder, as a shareholder? And how
did you protest?
Yeah, how did you protest? And how then would that affect the shareholding? Because perhaps my thinking would have been, if the government of Kenya is taking away land from you, because this is your company, Telkom, that perhaps if they do not find a way of compensating you in cash, then that could be compensated in terms of shareholding, maybe converted into shareholding. Was there such a discussion? How did you protest the decision by the government of Kenya to forcibly take over a strategic asset of Telkom Limited worth such a substantial amount of money?
And as a rejoinder, Paul, because this will be of great concern to this committee, in relation to what the co-chair is asking, if someone put it to you that this whole entire transaction had nothing to do with the ownership of Telkom or its assets, it was just a dealing that throughout the entire process had something to do with 51 million USD, because that seems to be the only thing of interest to anyone in this transaction. Because even the shares of Telkom Kenya, we see them now ultimately being bought back for $1. So the only commodity seemingly being transacted here is these big monies of 6 billion Kenya shillings. Absolute disregard for the entire telco, absolute disregard of who works there, no consideration whatsoever of whatever asset works. The whole transaction seems to be just going around these 6 billion Kenya shillings. If someone put it to you that this whole dealing from the entry to the stay And finally, the very hurried exit had only to do with these loan monies, what would be your response? Because everything else never seems to be an issue. The Telkom interests, their commercial interests, the staff at Telkom, the assets, all monies that were considerable, all considerable monies that have been dealt in this process only have to do with these 51 million USD, which you're saying was a loan. Yes. To the same question?
That 51 million. You see, the Ulon, I mean, I've just looked at the papers again, and really I was surprised, because this money which was ejected by Ilias to Telkom, and it was 47 million. And then Ilias came back to claim 3 million US dollars as interest. Now, my question is, if I'm buying to your company and I've ejected money, and the company is not doing well, all of us are losers, why are they coming back to claim interest on the loan? Because all of us are losers. I think even this question should go to the government, because whoever accepted to pay that interest need to tell us why did he accept to pay the interest.
You have a part answer to your question. I know you have partly answered your question. But Paul, kindly take us through first the clarifications, then exhaust the questions that had been asked so that we can take the final round of questions.
Okay, maybe, Mr. Chair, if we start with the last question. I think it should be clear from the actions of Helios during our ownership of Telkom that we did everything in our power to turn it into a successful business. The 47 million that we injected in the form of the loans was cash, physical US dollars paid into Telkom in order to help protect and to grow the business. We invested a lot of time from within the Helios team to try and find ways of strengthening the business and turning it into a more significant player in the Kenyan market. It was only when all of our efforts were frustrated that we felt the need to sell. Why did we look to get our loan note in interest? Well, we had a legal right under the terms of the initial agreement to put our interest back to the government. We have a duty to our investors to get the best deal that we can for them. And I think what we looked for here was to come out of our investment at least getting the money, the cash that we had physically put into Telkom, get that back, and then pass over ownership back to the government for a nominal amount. So we weren't looking for anything over and above what we had invested, plus pretty much a nominal level of interest, because 3 million on a $47 million loan is not a particularly high. It's a de minimis amount of interest given the quantum and the duration that was outstanding. Yes, and we had already previously agreed to freeze the interest from 2020 because we recognised that the company itself could not continue to pay that sort of interest on these loans. So we were doing everything in our power to make sure that Telkom remained a viable business. And as I said, when it was clear that we would not be able, or we wouldn't be the partners that could turn it round, then we looked to exit our investment and pass it back on to the government to, I guess, do whatever the government felt was the best course of action for TK.
Maybe a clarification. Did you ever receive any interest on this loan that you advanced to Telkom?
At the end, the difference between the 47 and the 51, that's the only interest we ever received.
So in the cost, when you advanced this loan to Telkom, you never got any payment from this particular, apart from this last payment that was paid, the $51 million?
The interest was accrued at the Telkom level, but never physically paid. So the only return we have had from the investment is that 51 million, nothing else.
Yes. Allow me, Honorable Mboni, so that we don't lose the trail. We are on this set of questions. Paul, have you exhausted that set of questions to your satisfaction? Members, you're the owners of your questions. So what I will do is that after the final questions, as I told you, I will give you a direct engagement with the witness through the chair. So don't be worried. Don't be worried. Daktari, you have a concern? Yes, you are. I was just saying to Honorable Mboni to hold on so that you can ask your question. Yes, just hold on. We done with that set of questions? Huh? Yeah, it's coming. We are coming within the order we had. Yes, that's where we are coming.
Question, Chairman, I had put a question on a yes or no about since 2016 to present time. The negotiations, the agreements that have been done, they have been done formally. And I wanted to know from Paul Cunningham, has he ever met any of the people, just to say yes or no?
Honorable Kivasu, I'll give you an opportunity to engage this witness to your satisfaction. I'm just begging for fairness. There are members who haven't put in their questions. Are we done with that set?
Mr. Chair, I believe we are.
Thank you. The next question shall now come from the Honorable Daktari representing the people of Turkana, followed by Honorable CPA Ruto, Honorable Kimayo, but you are actually ahead of Daktari. So Mr. Makilaps, you go first, then Daktari comes.
Thank you, Chairman. My questions are very straightforward to one Paul Cunningham. Who is this prominent Kenyan or prominent company in Kenya who is part of the Helios investment partners, who later came to give you registered a company called Jamhuri Holdings? Paul, Jamhuri is not synonymous to Mauritius. Jamhuri is synonymous to this country for reasons that are there. Who is this Helios investment partner who is prominent in Kenya? Who later on gave you Jamhuri, registered Jamhuri, and later on appointed you as a director? Paul, in Helios, you are chief finance officer. In my understanding, that's an employee. In the firm called Jamhuri, you are a director. Straight question. The other question that I wanted to ask you again is that Who, if today you are told to list, this committee finds fit to ask you to list all the partners so that we can pick those who are Kenyans. Who are the partners, investment partners in Ilios, so that we know who are Kenyans. And lastly, who nominated you for this last and maintained you for this last many years when Jamhuri bought shares of Orange Telecom and later on you were bought off by the government of Kenya? Who are you actually representing? Are you your own? Are you an investor in Jamhuri Holdings? Who are you in Jamhuri Holdings?
Daktari?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I followed this discussion or presentation by...
Allow me to request Honorable Makilabs to switch off the microphone. Daktari, we need to hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I followed the discussion or the presentation by Paul Cunningham. And I've come to the conclusion that we have a shadow of Paul Cunningham here in Kenya. From his presentation, because some of the things he doesn't know whether he had transacted those issues. That's number one. Going back, asking my questions to the principal, Paul Cunningham. Honorable Chair, Ilios invested in Telkom. I'm requesting Cunningham to tell us what was the valuation of Telecom Kenya before Ilios invested in Telecom Kenya, and how much, what was the price they paid when they acquired shares from Orange. Is it Orange? Orange. How much did you pay? The first instance, they invested in Telecom. Then secondly, what was the valuation when you are closing business with Telecom Kenya? What was the value of Telecom Kenya? And as per your shares, the 60% shareholding, how much were you supposed to be paid? Chair, if you look at the left-hand side of the balance sheet, there are so many things which informs us as investment of Ilios or Jamhuri holding in Telecom Kenya. One is the $47 million plus the interest. Secondly, what they acquired from Orange, including the loan that they took over from Orange. That will not amount to the $6 billion they have been paid. Is it true that there were loans that were carried forward from the previous transactions? We need to investigate whether there were loans. Chair, the name Jamhuri cannot appear anywhere in the world other than Kenya and Tanzania, or East Africa for that matter. I tend to believe or to come to the conclusion that this name Jamhuri was brought about by a person from this country. If this is what informed me of lifting the veil of incorporation of the two companies, because this Jamhuri, they refused to register in Kenya, but they went to Mauritius. Why? There's a question mark to that. Chair, even if Ilios are business angels, Business angels are individuals or companies who are well off, who are moneyed, who are ready to invest anywhere. They are risk takers. But now they have left this country in a mess without adding any value to Telkom Kenya or to the Republic of Kenya. I want to direct my question on the issue of the put option. From the agreement, it is not clear, because a put option is an agreement where the holder can only exercise the right to sell, but they have no obligation to exercise the right. But this right has a specific date, has a specific price, which is not disclosed in the agreement from the initial agreement of 2016. It is not clear of the price. It is not clear of the date of exercising the put option. Then again, from this put option, if it is not exercised, we could have gotten another investor if it wasn't exercised. That's what I know about the put option. I'm a professional accountant. I'm an accountant by profession. I'm a certified secretary by profession. Finally, from the presentation, I've come to the conclusion that there was no negotiation. The person responsible for all this transaction by the name Paul Cunningham, there's no other person. The name Paul Cunningham has become synonymous to all the presenters in these committees, these two joint committees. But unfortunately, this person is not known. I don't know whether Paul Cunningham was betting from London on the acquisition of Telecom Kenya. I raise my case, Chair. Thank you.
The questions are well noted. The Honorable CPA Ruto.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy you introduced me. I came in late while introduction had been made. As you heard, I'm CPA Julius Ruto, Member of Parliament, Kasese constituency, and a member of the Committee of Finance and National Economic Planning. The beauty of coming late in asking questions it will be much lesser since most of the issues have been articulated. But from my introduction, I'm a certified public accountant, and in accounts it's all about evidence. I would want to restrict myself to one Paul Cunningham, who has actually appeared synonymous. To me, I want to treat this person as an executive director of Jamhuri Holdings, and therefore is privileged to all the information and including documents of whatever we are discussing. It would be of my interest and the interest of this committee that one, all these documents we've discussed, including the instruments of a share purchase agreement done at 2016 between JHL and Orange, that was the initial investor at Telkom, to exceed Orange Company in Telkom. We want to know the presentation of that particular agreement. And I would wish that by this time and point, we want to see the physical document being tabled by one Paul Cunningham, being the CEO of, but in this case, he's a director of Jamhuri Holdings, means he carries some executive powers because all the correspondence are coming from him. I want to see the documents, evidence now of actual $47 million being injected to Telkom, the actual movement of physical cash, because we're able to see from our end the actual movement of 6 billion Kenyan money back to Jamhuri Holdings from the Kenyan government through the Ministry of Treasury. And because we are carrying out an inquiry, and Kenyans are waiting upon us to establish the real matter between the two entities, it would be of importance for us to see the physical, in terms of document, of $47 million loan
moving from Jamhuri Holdings to Telkom, so that we can justify the reason of 6 billion moving back from Treasury to Jamhuri Holdings. Well, it was a strategic investment for Helios through Jamhuri Holdings to acquire shares of Orange Company in Telkom. At this point in time, nothing will limit us now from knowing beyond Telkom Kenya and understanding the transaction between the two shareholders, the one who was coming in and the one who was moving outside. The loan of 199 million US dollars before accruing the interest to 239 million US dollars, surrounding 30 billion Kenyan money. I want to know, what was this arrangement that Jamhuri Holdings ceded to Orange Telkom in value in return of acquiring, because communication here says part of arrangement was to acquire loan of 199 million US dollars from Orange Company by Jamhuri Holdings and injecting additional 47 million US dollars to Telkom. I want to see the documentation between the two entities, because what we are seeing here and what Paul Cunningham is telling us, during the exit from Telkom, you've decided to forfeit the entire loan to Kenyan government, unless Jamhuri Holdings still carries some interest in Telkom, of which it will be very important to know now that there is still some more interest by Jamhuri Holdings in Telkom. I want to know how much were paid in evidence of the shareholding while you are exiting Orange Company from Telkom in terms of shares, so that you acquire ownership through buying of shares. The shares now you are forfeiting at a value of $1 to Kenyan government. What is this so sweet? Only about the 47 US million dollars loan that it was of interest only to recoup and let go of all the other investments that the company made in value to Orange Telkom, because that was a shareholder kind of engagement, and the shares that of course you exited. In this case, you say that you don't know about one Edin Joroke. Allow me, Chair, to refer to one letter written by one Paul Cunningham on 11th of August 2022. This was evidence provided by then Chairman Telkom, who is Edin Joroke. And allow me to just pick an extract of the content of the letter. Pursuant to SPA, I think that is Share Purchase Agreement, the directors nominated for appointment by JHL to the board of company, the board, are required to resign with effect from completion date of the transaction. JHL and GOK now ready to proceed to completion of the transaction. We therefore request that you tender your resignation as JHL appointed director and chairman of the board with effect from the completion date of the transaction. Enclosed herewith is the form of resignation letter and statutory declaration. Please execute the documents but not date them and return them to the undersigned. Yours sincerely, Paul Cunningham. The only challenge here, Chair, and I remember we had an issue with the signature. I mean, you could not clearly, unless there is, another person in the name of Paul Cunningham, or Paul Cunningham by himself, but I'm not an expert in that, but signed by Paul Cunningham instructing the Edin Joroke chairman to resign. And a normal arrangement of holding or investment in a going concern companies like Telkom, where you are owning shares more than 50%, then we regard the investor as being in control. And therefore, appointment of the board is a primacy of that particular investor, that they should have a representation in the board and in control. So I want to believe the chairman has to carry the interest of the investor of Helios or either Jamhuri Holdings. But Paul Cunningham is saying, I'm not aware, I don't know about how this particular person was appointed, whereas Paul Cunningham has been the director from 2008 in Jamhuri Holdings, who invested in Telkom. I want to know then, who was this person running the interest of Jamhuri Holdings in Telkom, if not one Edin Joroke? Lastly, and that is by way of observation, looking at the documents of correspondence of
Jamhuri Holdings, in comparison with what happens with the other documentations, you would see, I don't know whether this is the culture or practice of Jamhuri Holdings, that the documentation lacks clear branding that you would attach the interest of the car. That is, by the way, I'm not putting it up as an issue that you need to look at, but it shows lack of seriousness in engagement, whereas we are transacting with big values. But if you look at documentation, somehow it confuses because they are very light communication, no branding at all, like how we would be expecting such an every company investor to be. Lastly, can I know that are there any other interest that Ilios or Jamhuri Holdings have in Kenya other than Telkom and Equity? For record purpose, is it possible for us to know which other entities, whether as Ilios has invested through Jamhuri Holdings or through any other machinery in Kenya? Thank you so much.
Finally, questions from the Honorable Gideon Kimayo.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, from the onset, I want to know whether Ilios, or for that reason, Jamhuri Holdings, do they still claim any shares in Telkom Kenya? Have they surrendered the 60% shares? That's from the onset. Then secondly, Paul, in your submission, you've told us that all the laws of Kenya were followed, and you've cited Communication Authority of Kenya as one of the agencies that, cleared the transaction. So in your submission, you said all laws were followed. But in this committee, when we summoned the Director General of Communication Authority of Kenya, he told us that there are some conditions which he put that if they were cleared, and according to his understanding, those conditions were not met. So in other words, Communication Authority of Kenya never gave the approval. Secondly, you've said you've never met the people who have been mentioned. Edin Njoroge. You've also told us about John Nyangumi, who you've said was your advisor. All these names are synonymous with the regime of Uhuru Kenyatta. My question would be, at any given point, was the former President Uhuru Kenyatta involved in this? Last but not least, you've mentioned about Adili, which you said was paying some money, which was part of this transaction, the 6 billion which was paid out. You've told us that some employees of Telkom were beneficiaries through, you said some motivation or something. Are you able to tell us who are these Adili? Who are the owners of Adili? And, you said you don't have the exact information now who was paid, but it could be beneficial to this committee to know who are the exact people in Telkom Kenya who benefited from such money. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Muiti, before you ask the question, take the opportunity to introduce yourself, because you had not introduced yourself earlier.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dr. Shandat Muiti, MP for South Imenti, Meru County, a member of Finance National Planning Committee. Thank you very much. I'm proud that I have Paul in front of this House honorable members, a CFO in Harios, and a director in Jamhuri, and an interested party with Eddie Njoroge, who has refused to admit that he met here. My issue is very, very direct. On scrutiny of both areas, Jamhuri and Telkom, it is very, very clear when we put into account the relationship and the transactions, especially on a payment time, that particular time when the payment was done a few days before the elections. Considering the players who played a major role in the financial transaction. Mr. Paul, can you tell the honorable members how you identified your associates in these transactions in Kenya? Secondly, Paul, can you tell the honorable members that Jamhuri was not a conduit to transact or to siphon funds from Kenyan taxpayers for a benefit of individuals? And finally, Mr. Paul, the prayers you have mentioned here, how were you transacting with them? And the relationship also with the Mauritius are not a country of your origin. Thank you very much.
Chair.
Honorable Member,
Chair.
The members here have an opportunity to ask adjoining questions. There had been an indication from Honorable Mboni. You want also a clarification?
Chair, I just forgot one question.
Okay, you'll get an opportunity. Honorable Mboni?
Yeah, Chair. Thank you, Chair. And, I thought when Paul comes here, really is going to make our work a bit easier. But I think he's even making it more complicated for us. Chair, there are a lot of correspondence between Paul and the government of Kenya. And even a letter which was appointing Njoroge, and the letter which was also dismissing Njoroge. But it seems that Paul was acting for somebody. So my question is, who is the major decision maker in Helios? Because it seems not to be Paul. Paul seems to be brought things to sign on behalf of somebody whom we don't know. So who is that person? That's thing really we want to know. Secondly, I want just to agenda of the question which Honorable CPA Ruto asked. He said that they ejected a loan of 4.7 million US dollars, which they also, at the end of the day, they claimed 3.46 million as interest. Was there an agreement with the Telkom between Helios and Telkom? Telkom borrowing this money from Helios? I think we need to know that. Thank you very much.
Honorable Gideon Kimayo.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, when we were interrogating the CS, that's the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, in his correspondence with the control of budget, he was asking for money to pay you before 29 July, that this transaction was supposed to happen before 29 July 2022. So my question to you, was there any penalties, any damages that the Kenyan government would have suffered if the transaction was not done by 29 of July 2022? And if that is the case, was there any threats from your side to the Kenyan government? Thank you.
Finally, members, we shall get responses from Mr. Paul Cunningham, and these shall be the last responses we are getting from him this afternoon. And Honorable Co-Chair, you'll have an opportunity to ask any question that you have remaining. Paul, this is my second last question to you, and kindly just wear these shoes with me. I'd like to know if you were sitting on the side of a Kenyan taxpayer and you are looking back at this transaction, would you term this transaction as good value for money? And what did Telkom Kenya Limited get out of this? And for 6 billion Kenya shillings, what did Kenya as a country get out of this entire whirlwind roller coaster ride with Helios, Jamhuri, and Telkom, of course, being the principal? These are the questions. You can only answer it in 3 ways. Number one, it's either a coincidence. Number two, it's either that there is a relationship between the two. Number three is either there is no relationship between the two. Now, out of public records that we have, you opted to come in with your lawyer, who is Anjarwal Khan, if I'm getting it right, and Karim Anjarwal. And out of the public records we have, they also have other clients. I would want you to just look at this and tell me if it is coincidence, if it is inspiration, or whether there is no connection between the two. Now, this should be the logo of the law firm. Is this a logo of the law firm?
Yes, it is.
And the law firm also happens to have, these are the clients. Could it be coincidence? Could it be that one is inspired by the other? Or could it be that there is no relation whatsoever? It is one of the three. Yeah. So those are my questions, and you will get an opportunity to answer. Co-chair, kindly.
The last one is quite interesting, Honorable Chair. I have 2 last questions. Perhaps are you aware that legally you still the owners of Telkom Limited? Like as far as the registrar of companies is concerned, you are still the legal owners of Telkom Limited, because no shares has been transferred back to the government of Kenya, even after this payment has been made. And lastly, could you know that if your bank accounts in Mauritius could have been frozen for whatever reason, is your bank account for Jamhuri Holdings held in Mauritius still active, or has there been a freezing of the account or anything like that? Thank you.
Honorable members, you'll allow the Honorable Paul Cunningham to, not Honorable, Mr. Paul Cunningham to respond to the last set of questions. Kindly, Paul, and I'm told that the speed at which you answer these questions is what stands between this inquiry committee and lunch. So you can be mindful of the time.
Can I just have 2 minutes to run through the questions, because there were quite a lot.
Granted.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, perhaps on a point of order. There was a question that was asked with regard to the logo of the farm of Anjawala and Kana. If you could allow me to just respond to it on a point of order. It is public record.
Chairman, this lady is not on oath. Is she allowed to respond?
That would have been my reaction, but I want to hear what the question is. Maybe she will find a way of getting it answered through her client.
Okay. I was just going to say that it is a matter of public record with the Kenya Institute of Intellectual Property, so with KIPI. There was a dispute between NCBA and the farm of Anjawala and Kana with regards to the similarity between the brands of the two entities. So it was not a question of relationship between the entities. If anything, it was a matter of dispute, which was then settled, and the records are filed with the KIPI registry. So it is a matter of public record.
Wakili, that is noted, but the question still is, I was asking the client, your client, what his opinion is. It was an opinion question. Is there any relationship? Is one inspired by the other? Is there no relation whatsoever? And now you seem to be introducing even more information now that it has also even been prosecuted elsewhere. So anyway, I think your client is well suited to answer the question as I'd framed it.
And perhaps just a point of information, Wakili, even despite then what you provided, there existing a dispute in terms of the branding of your law firm and NCBA Bank. You still one of the key, I think you're still the key lawyers in this, for the bank. You know, it's interesting that have you never found a way of settling it out of this dispute, especially because you still do business with them?
The question Chairman would have asked before that would have been, according to the records that you have put out there as a law firm, this bank is still your client. Is that the case? Let me put it to you that according to your website, this is still your client. So you're telling us you're in conflict with your client?
You know, we would have wanted to answer that question in detail, but going back to the primary position, there are a number of questions that have been asked of our client. If we are going to be invited, we are happy to answer the question with respect to the logo, with respect to any other aspect that you do wish. Today we are here specifically to answer questions pertaining which have been put specifically to Mr. Paul Cunningham, and we would like to stick to those questions for this matter.
Chair. Just hold on. There is a very serious point of order that was raised by the honorable member representing Mboni. So if you will allow us, Wakilis, let's proceed with the manner that we were proceeding, where we pose the question to your client and your client responds. So kindly, is there a point of order from the floor?
I think the farm is also of interest to us because the way they are responding to questions, even questions which you are not even asked them, they are coming up to answer them. But now, when it comes to further questions, my friend here, and I think we have met severally in the finance bill discussions. Now he comes and says, "No, we have not come here for that." So I think the farm should come and we grill them. They give us more information. I think they know more than we do.
Point of order, Chair.
Well, there's a
yes, Chair. In our midst, there's another witness to this committee, and he's sitting with us. So I don't know if it is in order.
I had made a ruling on that, Honorable Kimayu. We only have appearing before this committee one witness in the name of Paul Cunningham, and that is why I could not admit a response from his counsel. So allow us to procedurally just get responses from the Mr.
Chair.
Paul Cunningham.
There's Mr. Mucheru,
who is our next.
Yes.
Oh, that's what you mean.
Yes.
Oh,
Chair.
not that.
Yeah.
Oh, I get you. You are not saying that the council is.
No, I'm not talking about the council. Our next witness is also listening. Is part of us.
Is he within?
Yeah.
Oh, Waziri, kindly, we have a session with you at 3:30. Kindly allow us to.
Chair, and even it is live. If he wants to listen, he can listen from the TV.
And we get a response from a very well man versed with matters media. But kindly, Waziri, just for the interest of us being able to process this witness, kindly we beg to admit you at 3:30. Much appreciated. 3:30, kindly. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, is it a coincidence that he was sitting next to?
I will not admit that as a substantive question. Kindly, let's get responses from Mr. Paul Cunningham. Mr. Paul Cunningham, we are expecting some responses from you. I'd granted you some 2 minutes for consultation. Kindly respond.
So I think the first question was, who's the prominent Kenyan behind Jamhuri? Maybe we just take a brief step back. Like every other private equity firm, when we look at a transaction, we give that transaction a code name to use internally so that if someone's emails or correspondence was, if they left it on a train or it was intercepted in any way, it wouldn't be clear what entity we were talking about. The code name for our acquisition of the interest in Telkom Kenya from France Telecom was Project Republic. And then again, typically when we set up the SPV, we will use the project name as the name of the SPV. Republic is a forbidden name. We didn't know this at the time, but in Mauritius, you cannot set up a company with the name Republic in the title. And so one of the very junior Kenyans on the Helios Investment Partners investment team told me that Jamhuri was the Swahili for Republic. And so that's how the name Jamhuri came about. It wasn't suggested by a senior Kenyan, prominent Kenyan. It was probably the most junior on the team who gave me a translation of the word Republic. And hence that entity, which is, it is just an SPV that is meant as a conduit between our fund and the investee company, is forever known by the name Jamhuri.
The second question is about...
I'm not sure that.
So if you look at the balance sheet of 47 million, he says it's not equal to 6 billion. I think just explain 47 plus $3 million converted into Kenya shillings is exactly 6 billion.
Yeah.
What happened in the water?
Yeah, so I think the next question was around the 47 million US dollars and the 3 million interest not being equal to 6 billion shillings. I think if you look at the whole of the 51 and convert it at the exchange rate at the time, it was the 6 billion shillings. But we received the US dollar amount, so I don't know exactly how that was exchanged.
Maybe the substance of the question would have been, is it possible for this joint inquiry committee to have its hand on the original, documents, the transaction documents, the very original transaction documents, so that they can certify themselves on the question that was posed by the Honorable CPA Ruto?
So is that for the 51, the loans going in? Those documents, the originals will probably be held with Telkom. We will have copies. But,
Chairman, I rejoined so that I'd be very clear on that. From my start, I had requested, since from the correspondence, it puts one Paul Cunningham as with executive authority to transact on behalf of Jamhuri Holdings. And on your hand, while you're parting with 47 billion, there must have been some documentations within your hand. Likewise, as you want to say, Telkom could be having. But since you are our witness here today, we want to receive documents originating from your hand that justifies or that evidence the actual transaction of 47 US million dollars as a loan injected to Telkom. I also asked, as the information that comes before this committee indicates, one of arrangements was for Jamhuri Holdings to acquire $199 US million loan from Orange. Are we able to see that particular, what was the consideration between the two shareholders? Because at this point now, we want to inquire, why is it that only 47 billion is of material, 47 US million dollars that is of material to Jamhuri Holdings, and we are negating the other information? what is it around this particular $47 million loan that you are claiming and negating $199 million you acquired from Orange? What was the consideration then at that time that you have forfeited to the Republic of Kenya, including the consideration of shares that you forfeited to the Republic of Kenya, turning all together comes to more than 50 billion Kenyan money, and only considered the only 6 billion. At the start of transaction, at the entry point of view, I'm asking that from your hand, provide us with the original documents. We will have our time with Telkom to again provide the original documents so that we don't rely on another witness to respond on what you are responding as a witness here.
And perhaps, thank you, CPA Ruto, for that question. I read to you Article 125 of our Constitution, and again, Article 125(2), Part B, talks about for the purpose of Clause 1, a House of Parliament and its committees has the same power as that of the High Court, and 1A, to enforce the attendance of witnesses and examine them on oath, affirmation, or otherwise, and B, to compel the production of documents. And therefore, this joint committee is invoking Article 125 of the Constitution to ask, to compel that you produce documents that shows when the initial payment was made, that we are calling shareholders' loan to Telkom Limited, and how much it was, and proof from your end that that actually money was advanced to Telkom Kenya Limited. Thank you.
Yeah, we can absolutely produce that documentation. We can show the funds going from Jamhuri into Telkom with the documentation behind it. I think the point I was making is that we may not have original copies, i.e. the original wetting signatures, because those will be held. And I can't remember who asked the question, but there was a request for original documents. Well, no, we will have our own copies of those documents with the original held at Telkom. But in terms of providing that evidence, yes, that's absolutely fine. That's something that can be done and will be done.
Yes, the copies will be sufficient. And on that, as you give us the documents showing how the initial money was paid to Telkom, also provide us with the documentation of how this 51 million USD was paid out. We see the money coming from Treasury going to Jamhuri Holdings, but you mentioned that there was this particular payment, there was legal fees, there was transaction fees, and there was money to management. We will also need documentation showing these particular payments and who it actually indeed gets paid to. Thank you.
Yep, that information can also be provided. No issue with that.
Proceed to answer the questions. The final set. It's now 3 o'clock, a minute past 3, and this committee shall be sitting at 3:30. So kindly respond to the final set of questions, Mr.
Sorry, apologies, Mr. Chair. Can I make one clarification, though, in terms of the documentation around the flow of funds? What we cannot provide is evidence of where it goes from when it reaches the Helios fund to the individual investors. That is very much subject to...
The information we are interested essentially is how evidence of how much went to the transaction advisor, how much went to legal advisors, and how much went to the management of Telkom Limited. We're not interested with the other partners that are of no interest in our jurisdiction, but we are of interest with payments that were made to individuals in our jurisdiction for this particular payment.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. That we can provide. Yeah. The next question is the actual surrendering of our interest in Telkom. So Jamhuri Holdings, as of today, should have no interest in Telkom Kenya. It has no beneficial ownership of Telkom Kenya. I believe from what I've seen in the press over the last few weeks and what I've heard here today, that the transfer of the shares has not been registered by Telkom Kenya.
Paul, I would want you to venture into that with a lot of caution, because I would imagine that would be something that you picked up maybe from the media as a report of an ongoing inquiry. Kindly don't rely on it as anything substantive. It is just a small snippet of something that is proceeding. Just proceed with caution on quoting.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I apologize if I was going too far. But as part of the transaction, we, as Jamhuri, signed a sale and purchase agreement which was co-signed by the government of Kenya. We also signed the stock transfer form, which was as the seller, and that was also signed by the government of Kenya as the purchaser. Both of those documents were delivered to the government of Kenya as now 100% owner of Telkom Kenya, and it is between the shareholder, the 100% shareholder of Telkom Kenya and Telkom Kenya to actually register that transfer. Because we have transferred over our shares, we are not in any position to effect that transfer. It's the remaining shareholders and the company secretary of Telkom that needs to reflect that transfer in the share register of Telkom. As far as we are concerned, we have sold our shares, we have transferred all of our interest in the loans. We have no interest left in Telkom Kenya. If that transfer has not been registered by Telkom Kenya, then it doesn't actually affect the fact that that the government still owns 100%. It is purely paperwork hasn't been updated by Telkom itself. And if I could refer you to a letter in the pack dated 19th of August, which really just basically confirms what I've said, that everything has been sent.
Read the line. Read that line.
So the letter refers to attaching the signed share transfer form, share purchase agreement, and various other documents, including the various approvals. Okay, moving on to moving on in terms of another question from Honourable Kamayo, in terms of the involvement of the former president, and certainly to the best of my knowledge that there was absolutely no direct involvement with the former president in this matter. I certainly never dealt with him. I'm not aware of anyone else having dealt with him. He is not a shareholder or beneficiary of any of the proceeds, either directly or indirectly. Okay, next question, again, I believe from Honourable Kamayo. Were there any damages if the transaction wasn't closed by the 29th of July? I mean, to the best of my knowledge, the 29th of July was just, I hesitate to say arbitrary, but it was a date chosen based on the signing of the agreements to sell, which was in May of 2022. So it was a standard period between signing the docs and closing. Had the transaction not completed, then I believe there would have been an option on either side not to proceed with the transaction. Did we make any threats to the government? Absolutely not. But there was, I think the parties did agree to extend the period, was prior to that. So yeah, all of the negotiations were done, I guess, on a very much a commercial basis. And then to answer one of the other questions from the co-chair, would I say this was good value for money for Kenya? I think the whole of the investment in Telkom Kenya by both ourselves and the government probably has not turned out as well as either party would have required. Was it a bad deal? Well, I think had we not gone in the first place, then the funding that Jamhuri put into Telkom would presumably have needed to come from the government of Kenya. So in terms of this deal, the government is probably in no worse a position than if we'd never invested in Telkom in the first place.
The question was in two parts. Of course, yes, there was how you entered, and there's also how you exited. The question was, in your view as a taxpayer, did you think it was a good deal? And secondly, what does Kenya get, and what does Telkom Kenya get out of this roller coaster ride? What do you think? Was there any benefit?
I think the acquisition from Jamhuri by the government of Kenya of the residual interest in Telkom has the potential to be a very good deal for the government of Kenya and for the people of Kenya, if there is the will from the government to open the telecom market to genuine competition. But that is something that we as an external investor couldn't really influence. It is something that will needs to be internal to the government of Kenya. So I think it has the potential to be a very, very good deal. However, if nothing changes, then maybe not. I don't know how things will turn out.
Just to let you know, there have been submissions to this inquiry that Telkom, in the sense, and you're not an expert in this telco space, but there's been numerous submissions that Telkom Kenya is all the worse off if it was owned by government. Government does not understand that space and cannot be seen to be trying to know how to run a telco. And in fact, many submissions have been that it was not wise to attempt to have government run a telco. But just for the record, I admit your opinion, though.
I'm not going to either agree or disagree with that, but yeah, I think it's a difficult situation where the best for Telkom may well have been the merger with Airtel, but that came up against security concerns from within the government. So it's that's a very fine balancing act that I think only the government can navigate. We certainly found that we were not able to determine or influence what was best for Telkom versus what was in the best interest of the country of Kenya. And then, in terms of, there was a follow-up question on the conditions of, whether the conditions were satisfied in place by the Communications Authority. We have a letter from the Cabinet Secretary confirming that all of the required conditions were fulfilled. I believe that's in the pack. Is that in the pack? It's in the pack. Yeah. If it's not in the pack, it certainly can be provided. And again, the question of the owners of Adili, again, they are trustees, so the owners of the entity called Adili is not really relevant here. What is relevant is who they are, who are the beneficial owners of the shares held in trust by the trust company, and that is the management and former management of Telkom Kenya. The owner of the trustees has no beneficial interest in those shares or in the proceeds arising from the sale of those shares. Okay. Quite possibly the easiest question for me to answer is, I was asked, can I confirm that Jamhuri was not a conduit to siphon money out of Kenya for the benefit of the former regime? And quite categorically, I can say that is not the case. Jamhuri was a vehicle used to facilitate the investment by investors, the 68 investors in the Helios Fund, who entrusted their money to Helios Investment Partners to make investments across the continent of Africa. It had no link to anyone from the government of Kenya, either direct or indirect. The question you asked about the logos, I think part of the reason my legal advisors answered it is because, to be brutally honest, I didn't even know what the NCBA logo was. So, pure coincidence, I have no idea who the other party is. So it could have had no influence on our decision. And, we have used Anjawala and Kana and the Africa Legal Network for pretty much all of the 15 years that I have been a partner at Helios.
Do you take that opportunity to grant your counsel to give the working to give? Because they had brought up a new line of of a contest that existed. Co-chair?
Yes, I think my co-chair, the legal counsel said they do not want to dwell on that particular matter. And said
Brilliant. Okay.
If you want, then we can invite them on that matter separately.
Your answer, Mr. Paul, suffices. Now, honourable members, you'll allow me. Is there any other question that you would like to attend to?
And then I can do a rejoinder question.
I would imagine that was the last one.
There are questions that are not answered.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I asked the condition of your bank accounts at Mauritius.
While you're answering that, kindly also, Honorable Ruto says that there is a question that wasn't answered. Can you place it in so that...
Thank you. I'm happy that you owned by your statement that actually Jamhuri is not a conduit account. But then I don't know why. I wanted to know what was the incentive as to why Jamhuri Holdings forfeited the shares that they had acquired in Telkom, including the loan of $239 million. On what value? And only focus, unless you are telling us you're given for free by Orange. If you are given for free, then freely given, freely give out. But then if you invested value, why forfeit and only concentrated only on $51 million? That is for the 7 loan injected and the interest thereon. And you've never said anything about the huge value of around $239 million. Thank you.
Paul, kindly, and after this set of responses, you can give your closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if we start with the bank account, yes, the account of Jamhuri in Mauritius has been frozen in the last couple of weeks. We are trying to find out why, and we will be raising it with the Mauritian authorities because there is absolutely no legal basis for that account to be frozen. There should be no suspicious transactions having gone through that account, and we will be pursuing that to the full extent of the law in Mauritius to have those funds unblocked, and are confident that when we put that before the Mauritian court with the evidence of who the owners of Jamhuri are, that blocking will be removed, because I think it sends a very bad message for both Kenya and Mauritius to other people, other firms like Helios, who might be looking to invest in the continent, that you can have your funds blocked with no evidence of any wrongdoing there.
Yes, perhaps, Paul, further answer that. When was this account frozen? How many weeks? How long ago was that?
I believe we were notified of it about 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. And you have not started engaging the authorities on why?
Yes, we have.
And they have not told you why they have frozen?
Not yet. No.
Okay.
There maybe in answering that there's a rejoinder. Just clarification, Honorable Shakil, kindly.
Clarification, but you told us you had already distributed those funds. In an idea as to if you are so clear that this, and you are clear that this is clear funds, it will be not a problem. But I did tell you that it did intimate to you that there is international body that follows through certain transactions. So maybe you'll find out yourself and make your clarifications. But I want to clarify to you that the United States Illicit and Drug Fund Committee or something, not committee, they are the ones who normally follow up on dollar transactions. And I can tell you we have not made any clarification on that score. So I hope that you do get your funds, but you cannot say that from your side it's very clear that there's nothing wrong. From our side, because we have this committee, we seriously do have some concern, as to the way it was done. So that's one thing, that we must protect our citizens and our country from that particular thing. So telling us that it will go badly for Africa, I don't think so. I think it's just transparency we're after.
Mr. Paul,
perhaps I could clarify? Yes. So I'm aware of the US government checks on all funds in US dollars. That has not come into play here. Of the $51 million, $50 million has been distributed either to our investors or to advisors, etc.
Maybe the question, so that we get it clear, and this, I didn't want it to open it up for discussion, was Jamhuri holding accounts exclusively used for the Telkom Kenya government transactions, or has it carried any other monies?
The Jamhuri Holdings bank account is exclusively used for Jamhuri's investment into Telkom Kenya. So it will have been used to remit funds into Telkom Kenya in the sum of $47 million when we funded, for which we received the loans. So that account will have been used to fund those amounts. It will have picked up any additional costs there. So it was an operating bank account since 2016. The point I was making on the freezing of the account is it is not to do with the US authorities blocking any transaction, because all of the transactions that we have paid out of that account in US dollars have been received by the end users. So what has been blocked is an account that held a sum of money from the proceeds that we had retained to cover any additional costs that arose until we wound the structure down. So that is not the way the US inquiries work. They will pick up on individual transactions that they would consider suspicious, and none of the transactions that have been processed out of Jamhuri have been picked up in that manner.
And perhaps, I didn't want to interrupt, but I realized I forget this question. And after you answer this, then you give your closing remarks. So I don't want to take us back again. You mentioned that the transaction fees was $4.5 million, and that's around 550 million Kenya shillings, in Kenyan currency. In this entire transaction, we see communication from yourself saying that we want to exit. The letter is received, and you say these are the terms. The letters are received. The Kenyan government processes the payment, and the payment is sent to Jamhuri Holdings bank accounts in Mauritius swiftly. Then what necessitated the need then to have these advisors and pay them almost $500 million Kenya shillings? I'm struggling to find what they would have done, or the role they would have done to require to be paid $500 million Kenya shillings as transaction fees.
Chair.
You want to put in a rejoinder?
Yes. On just what Honorable Chair said, part of the money that when there's advisory fee, the $4.5 million US, you've told us part of the money went to management of Telkom. I don't know if that's right. And if it is right, why were you paying management and you're exiting? What was the motive? Because initially you said you are motivating them. But why are you motivating people you are exiting out of? Why are you giving incentive to the same management that you are getting out of? You want to be out of Telkom, but you are paying them again, the same management. What is the motive?
Paul, I'd want this to be the final response, and so that we get your final closing remarks. Kindly shoot.
Yep. So maybe if I address the final point first in terms of the management incentive. Typically the point of a management incentive scheme is, yes, to incentivize the management team to help create value in the underlying business. And the point at which they receive that incentive fee, or having been retained in the business, is when the private equity investor has realizes an exit, and they will get paid their fee or their retention, their shares, out of the proceeds that the investor actually realizes. So again, it is very standard for the incentive fee to be paid after the fact, rather than, because if you pay them before we have exited, then there's no longer an incentive for them to take you all the way through to conclusion. No.
Chair.
Honorable, unless it is extremely critical.
Just something, a confirmation from Paul. So you can confirm to this committee that the current management team at Telkom Kenya benefited from the buyout of the shares in Telkom. Can you confirm to this committee?
I can confirm that some who were management at the time of the exit will have benefited. I have no personal knowledge of whether any of those individuals are still part of the management team.
And in your earlier description of management, to your understanding, this is including board members and members of the secretariat led by the CEO. This is, I want to take your understanding of management.
Yes.
So senior management is, it could be secretariat to the level of a CEO. It could also be management.
Correct.
Okay.
Just a rejoinder.
Allow me, members.
Please. These are very important.
Board members.
Honorable Mboni.
You see, now we are getting to the crack of the matter. Now, as a CFO, Chief Finance Officer, that amount of money actually is around 80% money which is supposed to be paid to the management, to the law firm, the transaction officer. Was that money paid to those people? Was the money paid, or is still in the account which has been frozen?
All money is due to the management, and if I can clarify, it's the senior management excluding board members that were part of the MIP scheme. All money is due to the management team have been paid in full.
And Honorable Boni, I can let you know that while you are away, we did request for the documents to accompany these claims, and the documents shall be furnished. The witness shall furnish this committee with those documents.
The documents? The payment documents?
Allow me, for the interest of members who have been here throughout, not to take us back kindly. Thank you, sir. Mr. Paul, my request now is if there is any other pending question that you would like to attend to, please attend to it and then give us your closing remarks kindly.
Okay, no further questions to respond to. I think I've covered pretty much everything that has been asked.
Any closing statements?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to close out, I think I would like to reiterate the fact that Helios Investment Partners is one of, if not the largest private equity funds exclusively focused on investing across the continent of Africa. Our investor base includes US government, UK government, IFC, Norwegian government, and many institutional investors from across the world. They expect the highest standard of probity from the people that they invest through, and we as Helios Investment Partners provide that. You know, we are transparent in the investments we make, how we make them, how we exit them. We are very clear that we avoid direct relationships with members of a government. We cannot avoid making investments that have some interaction with government, as we've seen here, but we are not in bed with any party in any government in any country across the continent. You know, we have invested over $3 billion across 33 countries.